Hello, I'm Shartia Brantley. Thank you for joining us here in New York City. You're watching Arise News Weekend, where you'll get deeper insight into stories making headlines around the world. In this hour, tragedy strikes in Cameroon as dozens die in separate Boko Haram bus attacks. New York prepares to bid farewell to the second police officer shot and killed in the line of duty. And North Korea's leader pays a special visit to an unexpected place. Those stories and much more straight ahead. Boko Haram continues to wreak havoc in Western Africa. A deadly attack and more kidnappings this week. At least 15 are confirmed to have been killed, possibly more in a bus attack in northern Cameroon. Reports from the region say militants stormed the bus and opened fire on passengers. Another 10 or more were severely injured. The attack comes after the abduction of 40 boys and men from a village in northeast Nigeria. Local residents and police are blaming Boko Haram. Boko Haram has abducted hundreds of people in the past year, boys to be recruited as fighters and girls as sex slaves. These new abductions come months after hundreds of schoolgirls were kidnapped by the terror group. Parents of those girls, now losing faith in the Nigerian government to bring them back, are calling on the United Nations to intervene. Gavina Garay reports.
Hope in finding the more than 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram in northeastern Nigeria is not lost entirely. While they've lost faith in the Nigerian government's ability to help them find their girls, they're now appealing to the UN.
We will engage the UN, would also write letters to the United Nations and protest this neglect and nonchalance.
50 of the 270 abducted girls managed to escape, but the fate of the others is unknown. One man who hasn't seen two of his kidnapped girls since they disappeared 8 months ago blames the government.
If the government cannot take action, we are asking for the United Nations to come in and help us. Or if the United Nations reject us, we just don't know what to do.
The Boko Haram jihadist group is notorious for committing atrocities in the region, where it is determined to carve out an Islamic State. Just 2 weeks ago, they were suspected of abducting another 172 women and children.
Progress in the search for AirAsia Flight 8501. Search crews have found 4 large pieces of debris from the plane. It crashed earlier this week on a flight from Surabaya to Singapore. 162 were on board. All were believed to have been killed. So far, 30 bodies have been recovered. The plane's black boxes have yet to be found. Another deadly plane crash, this time in the United States. 4 people were killed in Kentucky when a small plane crashed in a wooded area. What makes this crash story unusual is that a 7-year-old girl who was a passenger on the plane walked away from the crash scene to a nearby house seeking help. Police say the girl escaped with little injuries.
The emergency landing the pilot that was trying to make would have been the Kentucky Dam Airport. We're about probably 5 miles to 7 miles from that airport at our current location. The last time they had contact with the aircraft was about 1,800 feet in elevation near the northern point of Land Between the Lakes at Lake Barkley, very close to this area.
The plane was traveling from Illinois to Florida at the time of the incident. In Mexico, an American man on a retreat has been found dead after going for a hike. Gavino Garay explains.
An American man who went missing 4 days ago has been found dead in a canyon in central Mexico, authorities say. An intense rescue effort had been launched in search of 25-year-old Hari Simran Singh Khalsa, who was on a yoga retreat and went missing during a day hike. Just before his body was discovered, his wife Emily Smith described how he went missing.
So he went up for a short day hike. We were at a yoga retreat at Villa Maria in the Immaculata, and he just went right up the road, was planning to be gone for 3 to 4 hours. We were text messaging, and then he told me that he sent me a photo. A couple hours later, he said, "I've gotten lost," but he asked me to save food for him and that he would be coming back a little later.
Officials said the man appeared to have fallen from a canyon.
A wake was held in New York City today for one of the 2 officers killed in an ambush. 32-year-old Wenjian Liu was killed with his partner, Rafael Ramos, 2 weeks ago while the two were sitting in their patrol car in Brooklyn. The two were working overtime as part of an anti-terror drill when a 27-year-old gunman opened fire on them. Police say the gunman killed them in retaliation for two grand jury decisions to not indict two white police officers and the deaths of two unarmed black men. The funeral for Liu will be held tomorrow. NYPD Police Commissioner Bill Bratton is urging his officers to not, quote, carry out any acts of disrespect during the services, saying the services are for grieving and not grievance. New York police turned their backs on Mayor Bill de Blasio at the funeral for Rafael Ramos, angered for his support of what some perceive as anti-police protests. The funeral for Rafael Ramos was held last week. Funeral services for former New York State Governor Mario Cuomo will be held on Tuesday. The funeral will be held in New York City. Cuomo died on Thursday from heart failure just hours after his son Andrew was sworn in for a second term as governor. Andrew Cuomo's State of the State address has been postponed for 2 weeks because of the services. Still to come, a conversation about protecting one's rights in the wake of the Brown and Garner tragedies. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
I believe that people are watching news less today, definitely. I think that more so people are going online to catch their news.
We've numbed the human mind to murders and all these bad things. The content is a constant loop of the same stuff. So there needs to be, new content all the time.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
As we kick off 2015, we're taking a look back at some of our most impactful conversations over the past year. This fall, Amnesty International declared the killing of Mike Brown a human rights violation. It's likely the same could be said about the death of Eric Garner. A few weeks ago, Arise News' Francesca Maxime sat down with attorney Esmeralda Simmons, executive director of the Center for Law and Social Justice here in New York City, to discuss exactly what can be done to protect human and civil rights here in New York State and beyond.
Well, let's start with what we know. The Staten Island District Attorney did not indict in the Eric Garner case, forcing many to pose the question that we need an independent special prosecutor. What say you about that?
I say what I've been saying for the last 25 years. We need a New York State independent special prosecutors for race crimes, and particularly for crimes that involve police officers killing people in the Black, Brown, Latino community, racial justice issues. We've also called for a special federal prosecutor. We've asked for the Justice Department to do the same across the country. And that's harking all the way back to Reconstruction, where we felt we needed the federal government to protect us from the local authorities. So both would be very, very helpful at this point.
Why haven't we had a special prosecutor?
I don't believe that there's been the political will to appoint such a person, because that means that whoever appoints, or legislator or executive governor, et cetera, or maybe even the attorney general, they would be held responsible for that, and they would not be on the like list by the local police authorities. They would not be supported.
Right, it's a political issue, you're saying. We know that the Eric Garner death was actually filmed by a bystander, someone that they did indict, the grand jury did indict. And we also know that, right? And we also know, and we also know that what's come out of that is the potential use of body cameras on police themselves, so they can, I guess, self-police more. What say you about that move? And is
well,
that
I think it's
help?
a good move, because I think if there are body cameras on police officers, they will be more aware of the fact that people are watching. But I also say that the Gardner case, as well as obviously the Michael Brown case, taught us something about cameras and video. If a DA does not push for indictment, no matter how much video there is, there will not be an indictment. And in the Ferguson situation, I think people are all aware now that instead of having a regular grand jury, that particular DA constructed was almost a mini trial and never asked for an indictment. He never asked for a true bill. We don't know the facts as yet about what happened in Staten Island, and if it continues the way Staten Island usually works, we will never know. But yeah, I think body cameras are a good step forward. I do not believe they are a solution. I think we need independent, special prosecutor, government official that will not be beholden to the local police departments like the local DAs are.
Well, when we actually see on tape and hear on tape, I can't breathe, and we know that there are laws on the books that prevent the NYPD from using chokeholds.
Well, they say it's a procedural law, not a real law. It's against NYPD's procedure for officers to use a chokehold. But they did it. The man said he couldn't breathe. He died because of the chokehold, whether he could have breathed or not. And they still did not indict him. So that raises all kinds of questions. If the medical examiner says it's a homicide, and the homicide was caused by the chokehold, why was there not an indictment? So that's why we're in the streets.
Yeah, that's why we're in the streets, and I'm sure we'll continue to be in the coming days, potentially weeks as well. But a special prosecutor is what you're calling for. Attorney Esmeralda Simmons, that's all we have time for right now on Arise News Weekend. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much for covering this story and staying on it.
All right.
When we return, a review of the report that says torture was used by the CIA. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
If I was building my own network, it would be for the people, by the people. It would be very diverse. It would be with every culture you can think of.
If I was to start my own news network, it would reflect positive and negative within the continents and the countries around the world.
I think that I would be more looking towards young people.
If I were to build my own news network, it would look like New York City. Old, young, fresh, hip, classic.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
If I was to build my own news network, my own world network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic, but how cool would it be to get local stories from the impoverished country, the impoverished city that we don't know about?
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
As we entered the month of December, the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee released a report confirming that the CIA did use torture tactics on terrorist detainees. I sat down with Gwendolyn E. Lindsay Jackson, a defense attorney and retired United States Army JAG, and asked if any of this came as a surprise.
Well, I found that the report was, I think it was very explosive, to say the least. There was a lot of information, specifically detailing some of the egregious techniques that had been used, pretty much codified under the 2002-2005 Bush torture memos, and the authority by those memos to engage in something which is called enhanced interrogation techniques.
Well, do you think that the report was balanced? There was a lot of criticism after the exec summary was released.
Well, some are arguing that, you know, because the Senate Intelligence Committee is being led by the Democrats, and I think Senator Dianne Feinstein is the chair, they're suggesting that it might be politicized. But, however, you know, we see that John Brennan, who is who's in charge of the CIA at this current point in time, he was quite open and honest in exposing some of the egregious torture techniques that had been used, including waterboarding, and I think there's also this anal hydration procedure that's very painful, and there are a lot of stress positions. So I think that it is balanced, because you have a Democrat, on the other hand, who's in charge of the CIA, sort of taking ownership of some of the problems with it.
Well, is there any evidence that the techniques used prevented any terror attacks?
Well, in essence, the report says no, that in fact, most of the information that was obtained, the critical information, for example, the information used to find Osama bin Laden, the report suggests that the enhanced terror techniques had nothing to do with that it was just good old-fashioned, you know, investigative work, aside from that produced the leads to find Osama bin Laden. And there were 8 other very important cases where that was also the very same thing.
Do you think releasing that report has put America at risk?
Well, I think it does, but we really had no choice. There was a lot of pressure. I mean, we have to be transparent. And also, no other country besides the United States is going to release information that is not that flattering. So on the one hand, you give kudos to the United States and to the CIA and to the Central Intelligence Committee for releasing the information. And they're saying, let's get it out and let's make sure it never happens again.
Now, there's no statute of limitations on these crimes. Will anyone ever get prosecuted or go to jail for any of this?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, there are a number of laws that you could make the argument that members of the Bush administration, senior members, could be prosecuted if they knew or should have known that some of these stress techniques or some of the abominable techniques were being used, and it really was not to obtain any information. If it wasn't used for that purpose, you could make the argument that, you know, there is jurisdiction under a number of laws, federal laws, that you could go after these people. And especially if you find that certain CIA agents actually hid the nature of these tactics and hid most of the information from the Bush administration. So there's a lot of ways that you can go after people.
Oh, yeah, so much more to discuss. Thank you so much, Gwen, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Still ahead, the life of an American icon. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
If I was to build my own news network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city.
Shahana Bhatt, Arise News, New Delhi.
Karim Gamaluddin, Arise News, Cairo.
Dale McEwen, Arise News, Karagosk.
James Blue, Arise News, Addis Ababa.
Ronnie Curvelo, Arise News, São Paulo, Brazil.
We give them different angles on stories so they can get a different perspective of the people that they are looking at.
It's hard to pin down the exact number of Syrian refugees who have streamed across the border into Lebanon.
They stormed a media room in one of the hotels in Kuala Lumpur, holding placards reading, "Tell us the truth and return our families back to us."
Anchors and reporters that have covered wars, have covered disasters, have covered government
government shutdowns. There's nothing almost that this team hasn't experienced.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
One of the great things about Arise News, it is truly a multicultural global channel that is paying attention to communities of all different kinds, not just here in the United States, not just in Africa, but all around the world, as we're giving a voice to the people that don't traditionally have the kind of a voice that a mass media organization can have. You're getting here at Arise News that you're not going to find at the other networks is a unique perspective, and I think that's part of what Arise is here to do.
In the world of entertainment, mega pop star Madonna is being accused of crossing the borderline after posting pictures of Black civil rights leaders on Instagram. Madonna is facing a loud chorus of criticism after posting images of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela to promote her new album, Rebel Heart. The pop starlet has been applying the album cover's signature look of wrapped nylon cords over the faces of a variety of icons. But fans let her know she hit a sour note when she used the artwork on the civil rights leaders. Madonna took to Facebook to apologize and assure critics she is not comparing herself to Dr. King or Mr. Mandela. And when it comes to icons, unfortunately, 2014 marked the fall of a huge one, comedian Bill Cosby. His 1980s sitcom and its stars introduced America to a Black family dealing with problems all families can relate to and consequently transformed the way people saw Black Americans. Before all those accusations began, a new biography was released entitled Cosby, His Life and Times, written by Mark Whitaker. Arise News' Francesca Maxime sat down to talk with him about the icon before the scandal.
What inspired you to write this book?
Well, you know, like millions of people, I've always been a Bill Cosby fan. It started when I was a kid in the 60s. You know, I come from a mixed-race family. My dad was Black, my mom is white. They had split up, and we had ended up with my mom living in a small town in Massachusetts where there are no people of color. So all of a sudden, she brings home this comedy album with this handsome Black man on the cover telling these hilarious stories about having his tonsils out and smearing the floor with Jell-O to keep the chicken heart monster away. Right. And then later, you know, 20 years later, in the 80s, I was just starting a family when The Cosby Show came on the air. So I loved that show, but it also was sort of, you know, a model of family life for me and my wife. But I was also interested in him as a social figure because, as I think I show in the book, I think he is someone in a quiet, subtle way who's made a huge difference in the history of this country.
And that was leading into my next question, because it's been said that in some ways we may not have ever elected a Black president or a biracial president, depending on how you want to look at it, as the President of the United States, had we not been introduced to the Cosby family.
So you know who made that point on election night 2008?
The Huxtable family.
Karl Rove. Karl Rove was on Fox News 15 minutes after Barack Obama was declared president, saying that The Cosby Show had helped prepare people, I think, not only for electing Obama, but the idea of an African-American family in our national home, the White House.
Well, you know, that is obviously the biggest role that our nation has to have. But in the world of media and television, you also held extremely high roles at both CNN and NBC. What was it like to transform from being the head of, you know, a news gathering division to then writing this book? Did it help? Were there parodies?
Well, you know, in some ways it was nice to get back to, you know, how I started. The reason I went into this business was to write and to report. And, you know, the fact is Cosby did not cooperate with this book at the beginning. It took me a year of reporting and interviewing and research before he finally reached out to me and said, you know, I see that you're serious about this, so I'm going to give you some access and some cooperation. So, and by that time, even though I probably, you know, I had limited time with him, mostly on the phone, and I got to travel with him, I was really ready because I had done all my research and my reporting, and I knew exactly what I needed to get from him.
What was the most surprising thing that you learned about Bill Cosby in doing your research?
So we all know about Bill Cosby's successes, but what people don't know, most people, are all the failures. He's had a lot of of professional setbacks, TV shows before and after The Cosby Show that were flops, periods in his career where things weren't working. He almost went bankrupt in the early 70s because his manager put him into a bad production deal. And he's also experienced a lot of pain and struggle in his own in his personal life, starting with a difficult childhood, growing up in a housing project in North Philadelphia, all the way through the murder of his only son, Ennis.
We also know that you chose not to go into some of the sexual allegations against Bill Cosby in this book. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I do get into, some of his personal life and, some of his history of indiscretions and infidelity and so forth. But I wanted to make sure that everything in this book was completely accurate and that I could stand behind it. And some of these allegations were ones that there had never been any definitive court findings. There was no independent witnesses. And I just felt that journalistically, I couldn't defend putting them in the book unless I could say for absolute sure that they had happened.
Well, journalistically, do you see yourself getting back into news, or do you have a new topic for a new tome that you want to?
Well, we'll see what comes along. But I've really enjoyed writing books. And I'm particularly interested now that, having written this book, actually about the history of this medium of television, and it's been so influential, and it's only been in the last 75 years. And I'm thinking of going back to the beginning and kind of like telling the story of the origins of television, because I think it probably can also tell us some important things about this new digital era that we're starting to go into.
And clearly with that digital platform, a lot more opportunities for expression. And I think also some of the things that you and I share are authors, our alma mater, then of course being journalists, but also being biracial. How, and you obviously have children now, how has that shaped your worldview, do you think? And how are different voices being represented and maybe misrepresented or need to still be represented in the media that we see today?
Well, one of the things that I think, I think has happened in the society, I think, is that people from many different backgrounds feel very comfortable being who they are and a kind of diversity. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's necessarily reflected enough, I think, in our media. But it's going to have to be, because that's the way our country is going demographically. And unless the media catches up, they're going to be missing an opportunity in terms of audience.
Mark Whitaker, thank you so much for joining us, the author of Cosby, His Life and Times.
Thanks so much for having me.
Still to come, North Korea's Kim Jong-un makes an unexpected visit. You're watching Arise News Weekend.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Well, diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un steps into the spotlight visiting an orphanage. He was joined by his sister, Yo Jong, who is said to have married another high-ranking government official. Mana Rabier has more.
Intimate, colorful scenes out of North Korea. State TV releases this video saying it was taken January 1st as its leader Kim Jong-un visits an orphanage in the capital Pyongyang. It said he was accompanied by his sister Yo Jong. That's her in the black coat. She's reportedly married the son of one of the country's most powerful officials. That's according to South Korean media on Friday, citing unnamed sources. Last year, state TV reported that Yo Jong, who's about 27 or 28 years old, had assumed a senior position in North Korea's ruling Workers' Party. She's the only other member of the ruling Kim family known to have an official job inside the government, although an official at South Korea's Unification Ministry said it could not confirm that report.
That's it for our show today. I'm Shartia Brantley. Have a good evening, and thanks for joining us here on Arise News Weekend.